Today I want to talk about some great American stores you probably remember. The kind of places that were just part of life. And then between about the year 2000 and 2020, one by one, they all started disappearing. Now I bet you're a lot like me, and you figured the internet just came in and wiped these places out. That's what I thought too. But the real story is uglier. A lot of these stores didn't just die, they were killed. By Wall Street deals nobody voted on. By executives who walked off with bonuses while the workers behind the counter lost everything. So here are 10 American stores we lost, and the real reason each one went dark. Let's start at number 10, Hollywood Video. Now, if you're like me, you might have to think for a second to remember this one, because Blockbuster cast such a big shadow. But Hollywood Video was real. The neon signs, the popcorn smell when you walked in, that slightly cooler, younger cousin vibe compared to the corporate Blockbuster across the street. At one point, this chain had over 4,000 stores. And here's where it gets ugly. Back in 2005, a smaller rival called Movie Gallery decided to swallow Hollywood Video whole in a $1.2 billion takeover. They borrowed almost $1 billion to do it, loaded the new combined company with debt right when Netflix was about to change everything. Within 5 years, both names were gone. 15,000 workers lost their jobs across the United States and Canada. But here's the part most people never heard about. After the company went under, the bankruptcy folks sold off all the unpaid late fees to debt collectors. 3.3 million former customers got hounded over disputed $5 charges from a video store that no longer existed. People got denied mortgages over it, got their credit ruined. It got so bad that state attorneys general had to step in and force a settlement. Took me a minute to wrap my head around that one. You return a movie late in 2008, and 7 years later, it's blocking you from buying a house. That's not a business failure. That's something else. Number 9, CompUSA. If you bought a desktop computer between 1995 and 2005, there's a real chance you bought it here. CompUSA was the temple. Big aisles, software in giant cardboard boxes, guys at the counter who actually knew what a hard drive was. At its peak, more than 220 massive stores across the country. So how did it die? Well, prices for computers fell off a cliff. A PC that used to cost $2,000 dropped under $1,000. Margins evaporated. And instead of pivoting to TVs and home electronics like Best Buy did, CompUSA just froze. In the year 2000, the Mexican billionaire Carlos Slim bought the whole chain for $800 million. He poured in another $2 billion of his own money trying to fix it, hired CEO after CEO. Nothing worked. By 2007, he sold the whole thing to a liquidation firm called Gordon Brothers. 15 weeks later, every store was gone. 14,000 jobs vanished. And here's something most people miss. CompUSA's death also wiped out hundreds of small local computer shops, the little 2- and 3-person businesses that depended on CompUSA's tech desk to send them work. When the big store closed, all those mom-and-pop computer repair guys lost their pipeline overnight. One closure, thousands of ripple deaths.
Number 8, HHGregg. If you lived in the Midwest or the South, you probably saw their commercials. Started in Indiana back in 1955 by a fella named Henry Harold Gregg. The whole pitch was personal service. You went in to buy a refrigerator, you got somebody who actually knew refrigerators. Multi-generational customers, real loyalty. Then, in 2005, a private equity firm called Freeman Spogli bought up most of the company. And here's where I want you to pay close attention, because this same story is going to come up again and again on this list. The new owners weren't interested in slow, steady growth. They wanted big numbers fast, so they could take the company public and cash out. So, when Circuit City and another chain called Linens and Things went bankrupt in 2009, HHGregg started snapping up their empty stores. Aggressive expansion, nationwide. Right when flat-screen TV prices were collapsing and mall traffic was drying up. By 2017, HHGregg was bankrupt. 5,000 jobs gone. But here's what really got me. Right up until the end, HHGregg was still taking cash deposits from regular folks for appliances that hadn't been delivered yet. Working families putting down a few $100 for a washer or a fridge. The company knew it was going under, took the money anyway. And when the doors closed, all those customer deposits, gone. Those folks were last in line in bankruptcy court, behind the banks, behind the lenders, behind everybody. I don't know what to call that other than what it is. Number 7, Sports Authority. Now this is the one that proves something important. The death of these stores wasn't always about the internet. Sometimes the math just killed them before the internet ever got the chance. Back in 2006, a private equity outfit called Leonard Green and Partners bought Sports Authority for $1.3 billion. But here's the trick. They didn't really pay $1.3 billion. They borrowed most of it. And then they put that debt onto the books of the store itself. So, Sports Authority woke up the next morning and suddenly owed over $1 billion in loans it hadn't taken out. Every dollar of profit had to go to interest payments. There was no money left to fix up the stores, no money to build a website that worked, no money to fight back when Dick's Sporting Goods showed up and ate their lunch. By 2016, the math caught up. 14,500 jobs gone. Most of those folks were part-timers who got no severance, nothing, just a final paycheck and a parking lot full of clearance signs. Meanwhile, Nike was owed $47 million by Sports Authority. Under Armour was owed $23 million. ASICS, another $23 million. The brands made the shoes, shipped them on credit, and got nothing back. Now ask yourself a question. Did Sports Authority die because Americans stopped playing sports? Of course not. The athletic market was booming. They died because somebody used the company itself as collateral on its own funeral. Before we get to number 6, quick reminder to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It's free, takes a second, and it really does help the channel grow. All right, back to it. Number 6, Pier 1 Imports. This one's different. Pier 1 wasn't killed by Wall Street debt. It was killed by something simpler and in some ways sadder. Bad decisions from inside the company itself. For decades, Pier 1 had a thing. You walked in and it smelled like patchouli. There was wicker furniture and beaded curtains and weird glassware from somewhere overseas. It was a treasure hunt, affordable, a little exotic. Your aunt probably had 3 things in her living room from there. Then, in 2018, a new CEO came in with a plan called A New Day. The plan was to throw out everything that made Pier 1 different and try to compete head-to-head with Wayfair on cheap mass-market stuff. It bombed instantly. Sales dropped 11% in 1 quarter. Loyal shoppers, the people who'd been coming for 30 years, walked away. New shoppers never came. The supply chain panicked. Overseas vendors started demanding cash up front before they'd even ship. Within 2 years, Pier 1 was in bankruptcy. 18,000 jobs lost across the US and Canada. And here's the part I find genuinely sad. The brand name didn't even die. A holding company bought it out of bankruptcy just to keep it alive as a website. A ghost. Same name, no soul. You can still go to pier1.com and buy stuff. It's just not Pier 1 anymore. It's a logo somebody owns. Number 5. Linens and things. If you're over 50, you probably had a wedding registry there, or you outfitted a kid's dorm room there, or you just liked walking through it on a Saturday because it smelled clean and felt fancy. 571 stores at its peak. A real fight with Bed Bath & Beyond for the soul of suburban America. So what happened? Same playbook, different name. February 2006, a private equity firm called Apollo Global Management bought the chain for $1.3 billion. Loaded the company up with debt. The buyers themselves put almost no money in. Then, 2008 hit. Housing crashed. People stopped buying sheets and towels. The debt payments didn't care. By October of that year, every single store was being shut down. 17,500 jobs erased. And here's the gut punch. Around 400,000 regular Americans were holding Linens and Things gift cards, $42 million worth. Christmas presents, birthday gifts, wedding cards from the in-laws. The bankruptcy court basically said, sorry, the banks come first. The big lenders got paid. The gift card holders got nothing. Imagine giving your daughter a gift card for her wedding shower, and a few months later, it's just a piece of plastic. That happened to 400,000 people, and nobody ever made it right. Number 4, Borders. Now, this one hurts in a different way. Borders wasn't just a store. For a lot of folks, especially the ones who didn't have a great library nearby, it was the closest thing your town had to a real gathering place for people who liked to read. Big, comfy chairs, a coffee bar, aisles that went on for blocks, books stacked floor to ceiling, people reading magazines they had no intention of buying. It was a community space, and it was a giant. At its peak, 1,249 stores, including the Walden Books chain inside the malls. Here's what killed it. In August 2001, Borders made what might be the dumbest single business decision I've ever read about. They handed their entire online business over to Amazon. Just gave it to them. The reasoning was something like, the internet's a hassle. Let somebody else deal with it. So Amazon ran Borders.com for almost a full decade. And the whole time, Amazon was learning. Studying who was buying what, building the Kindle, perfecting the warehouses. By the time Borders woke up in 2008 and said, wait a minute, we should probably do this ourselves, the game was over. They didn't even have their own e-reader. They were selling somebody else's. Borders went bankrupt in February 2011. By July, the judge said no more. Total liquidation. 10,700 employees fired in a single month. Total job losses around 19,500. And the saddest part? When Borders closed, a lot of those big stores became gyms or dollar stores, or just sat empty. A whole lot of suburban towns lost their main gathering spot. Just like that. There's no replacement for that. There really isn't. Number 3. RadioShack. Now, I want to tell you about RadioShack because the story of how this one died is honestly one of the most twisted things I've come across. RadioShack used to brag, and this is true, that 90% of Americans lived or worked within 5 miles of one of their stores. 5,000 locations. The place where every dad bought batteries and every kid bought their first remote control car. By the early 2000s, RadioShack was in trouble. Too many stores eating into each other's sales. They'd given up on hobbyist electronics and tried to sell cell phones, except by then, everybody was buying phones from their carrier. So in 2014, 2 hedge funds, Standard General and Lightspeed Management, swooped in with rescue money. Sounds nice, right? Hedge funds saving the day. Except that's not what happened. According to lawsuits filed later, those hedge funds actually stopped RadioShack from closing unprofitable stores when it should have. They wanted the company to keep bleeding, so they could time the bankruptcy just right. And when the bankruptcy finally hit in 2015, Standard General used a slick legal trick called a credit bid. They basically used the debt RadioShack owed them as currency to buy the best parts of the company out of bankruptcy court for $26 million. $26 million. For a brand that used to be in every American town. Then they partnered with Sprint to do this weird store-within-a-store thing. That failed too. Second bankruptcy in 2017. 21,000 jobs gone in the first round. Thousands more in the second. The hedge funds walked away with the brand name and the customer data. Everybody else walked away with nothing. That's not a market force. That's a strategy.
Number 2, Circuit City. I'm going to be honest with you. Of all the stories on this list, this is the one that makes me the saddest, for 2 reasons. 1, I worked at Circuit City in the computer department. Back then they called it ACE. And 2, because Circuit City didn't have to die. The damage was done from the inside, on purpose, to chase a quarterly earnings number. Quick history. Circuit City was the king before Best Buy was. 60,000 employees at its peak, 616 stores. So famous for being a great company that a Big Deal business book in 2001 used it as an example of a corporate success story. Now here's what happened. In February 2003, Circuit City executives made a decision that I still cannot get over. They fired 3,900 of their best, most experienced salespeople in a single day. These were the experts, the folks who could earn $75,000 a year because they actually knew how to help you pick out a TV or a stereo. The whole reason you went to Circuit City instead of somewhere cheaper was because the people behind the counter knew their stuff. The executives fired all of them to save on payroll, replaced them with minimum wage hourly kids who'd been on the job a week. Customer service collapsed overnight. Then, 4 years later, in 2007, the new CEO did it again. Fired another 3,400 senior workers. And here's the kicker. Right after firing those workers to save money, the executives gave themselves big bonuses. There was a public outrage about it. Didn't matter. The damage was done. Circuit City filed for bankruptcy in November 2008. By March 2009, every store was gone. 34,000 jobs erased. The pension plan was $64 million short. 21,000 retirees and former workers had their retirements partly absorbed by a federal agency, which means you and I, the taxpayers, helped clean up the mess. Meanwhile, the lawyers and consultants who unwound the bankruptcy collected over $212 million in fees. $212 million. To clean up after a company that fired its own people to chase a stock price. Anybody who tells you the death of Circuit City was Amazon's fault hasn't read the file. Amazon didn't fire those salesmen. The executives did, and they got rich doing it. Number 1, Blockbuster. Of course it's Blockbuster. There's no other ending to this list. The blue and yellow ticket. The Friday night ritual. Walking those carpeted aisles with your wife or your kids. Reading the back of the boxes. Fighting over which movie to take home. At its peak in 2004, Blockbuster had 9,094 stores worldwide. 84,000 employees. The most well-known retail chain on the planet. Most folks know the famous story. Blockbuster could have bought Netflix in the year 2000 for $50 million. The CEO laughed in their face. That's true, but that's not actually what killed Blockbuster. What killed Blockbuster started a few years earlier when the parent company, Viacom, decided to spin it off. And when they did, they dumped $1 billion of debt onto Blockbuster's balance sheet. So all through the early 2000s, when Blockbuster should have been investing in streaming and digital, they were instead funneling cash to pay off a debt that wasn't theirs to begin with. Meanwhile, the company was hooked on something pretty ugly: late fees. In the year 2000, $800 million of Blockbuster's revenue came from late fees. About 16% of everything they made came from punishing their own customers. Think about that. Their own business model trained customers to resent them. So when Netflix showed up with no late fees and a flat monthly subscription, folks didn't just switch, they switched with relief. Then, in 2007, an activist investor named Carl Icahn took over the board, fired the CEO who was actually trying to build a digital business, and brought in a new guy who pulled all the digital investments and bet everything on the physical stores. 3 years later, Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy. By 2011, the assets were sold off to Dish Network for $320 million. 25,000 of the remaining workers lost their jobs. Carl Icahn dumped his shares at 26 cents apiece. He later called Blockbuster the worst investment he ever made. And you know what's funny? It didn't have to be that way. Blockbuster did try to fight back with a program called Total Access. You could rent online and exchange in store. People loved it. It was actually working, but the executives killed it because it was eating into the late fee money. They chose the punishment over the customer, and the customer chose Netflix. So that's 10. And I want to say something before we wrap up, because this is the part that doesn't get talked about enough. Look at the list. Really look. Sports Authority, Linens and Things, RadioShack, Circuit City, HHGregg. These weren't dying companies that the internet swept away. Most of them were healthy or had a clear path to survival. They got bought by Wall Street firms who used the companies themselves as collateral on the loans used to buy them. Then, those companies had to spend every dollar of profit on interest payments. There was nothing left to fix the stores, or build websites, or pay workers fairly. And when the bankruptcies finally came, the same Wall Street firms walked away with management fees, and brand rights, and tax write-offs. The workers got nothing. The pensioners got nothing. The customers holding gift cards got nothing. The vendors who'd shipped product on credit got nothing. The taxpayers picked up the pension shortfalls. And I think this is what bothers me the most about the standard story we get told. The story that says it was just Amazon, just Netflix, just the internet. Because that story lets a lot of guilty people off the hook. The truth is messier and harder to explain in a 30-second news clip. But the truth matters. Because the same people who did this to retail in the 2000s and 2010s are still out there. Still buying companies, still loading them with debt, still walking away rich while the workers get walked out the door. So I want to hear from you. Which of these stores do you miss the most? Which one's closure hit your town the hardest? Maybe you worked at one of them. Maybe your dad worked at one. Drop your story in the comments below. I'm serious about this. I read every single one, and the stories from folks who actually lived through these closures are some of the best history I get to read each week. And if you've stuck with me this far, and you want more videos like this one, where we actually go behind the headlines and look at what really happened, just hit that subscribe button below. It's the round red one right under this video. Tap it once and you'll get notified when the next video drops. This is Econo Nova. Keep an eye on the price of milk.